Good evening. Perhaps one of the most honored and revered humanitarians of the 20th century was the Catholic bishop Oscar Arnulfo Romero y Galdamez, also known as the Bishop Oscar Romero. Romero's life echoed with wars on social injustice, poverty, assassinations, and torture. Pope John Paul II bestowed him with the title Servant of God in 1997. He is honored by Christians worldwide in multiple denominations as a great spiritual leader and champion for the poor. I will give a brief biographical sketch of the Bishop Romero, informing you of four major points and major areas in his life. Firstly, his early life. Secondly, his life as a priest. Thirdly, his life as a bishop. And fourth and finally, his death and legacy. First, on his early life, Romero was born August 15, 1917, to Santos Romero and Guadalupe de Jesus Galdamez in the San Miguel department of El Salvador. Oscar was baptized into the Catholic Church a little less than 2 years later on May 11, 1919. At this time, persecution was rampant in the Catholic Church as a bunch of the bishops and priests had an increased concern for the poor rather than spiritual matters and political matters. During his free time in his early life, Romero spent his time at one of two local churches, revealing a sign of piety at a very early age. Romero went through the local government-funded public schools, and then afterwards was privately tutored by Anita Iglesias until he was 13 years old. His father trained him as a carpenter when he was very young, encouraging him to enter the trade field rather than the academic field because it promised a greater career. However, regardless of his father's advice, Romero, at the age of 13, went into seminary and sought out a licentiate in theology. He successfully achieved his goal and became an ordained priest in the Catholic Church in Rome on April 4th, 1942. Secondly, his life as a priest. As a newly ordained priest, Romero then continued his studies in Italy to further obtain a doctorate in theology with a focus in ascetical theology, which just means theology specialized in practice and practical spirituality as it concerns day-to-day life. However, before he was able to finish his doctorate, he was summoned back home to El Salvador by the Catholic bishop with his friend and fellow doctoral student, Father Valladares. On their journey back to El Salvador, however, they were detained by Cuban police because they had been departing from Italy, which was a fascist country at the time. Eventually, imprisoned, Valladares, his friend, became terribly sick, and the two were then transferred to a hospital where they were released from Cuban custody and were able to travel back to El Salvador without delay. As a priest back home in El Salvador, Romero worked first in a parish in Amareros, but then traveled to San Miguel, his hometown, where he worked for more than 20 years. Some significant achievements Romero accomplished as a priest include the establishment of an Alcoholics Anonymous group, helping in the construction of San Miguel's cathedral, and constant support to the Virgin Mary in the Catholic Church. He was later given a leadership role in a local seminary in San Salvador, and in 1974 was appointed as bishop of the Diocese of Santiago de Maria, which was a very impoverished area. So now, that was his life as a priest, and now we're transferring to his life as a bishop. Now, his appointment as a bishop created much stir in the Catholic Church because he had an incredibly conservative ideology and theology, which a lot of people were concerned would inhibit the rise of liberation theology. Romero also became very famous for petitioning U.S. President Jimmy Carter during the Salvadoran Civil War to cease military aid to the uprising of the new government in order to preserve the basic human rights of the Salvadorans. He greatly petitioned Jimmy Carter to stop sending in military troops to the Salvadoran area. But fearful of the consequences, Jimmy Carter ignored Romero's requests, and then the Salvadoran Civil War continued despite his efforts. As a bishop, Romero also was well known for fighting against the persecution of Catholics who worked hard to aid the poor. Amidst much persecution in the Catholic Church due to this commitment to the poor, Romero was vigilant with his focus on the impoverished, relentlessly providing aid to those in need. And fourth and finally, his death and legacy. Romero's untimely death occurred when, on March 24, 1980, he was assassinated while attending Mass in a small chapel after preaching and admonishing the Salvadoran Christians to obey God's call to love the poor instead of spending their time meddling in the affairs of the government. Romero was buried in the Metropolitan Cathedral in San Salvador, and more than 250,000 people from all over the world attended his funeral. Romero's legacy outlived his death, as he was awarded with the Nobel Peace Prize and was recognized internationally as the greatest humanitarian of the century. On May 7, 2000, Pope John Paul II commemorated Romero as one of the greatest 20th century Christian martyrs, and on March 22, 2011, our own president, Mr. Barack Obama, visited the tomb of Oscar Romero to pay his respect to the beloved bishop. His legacy lives on, and his story as a diligent advocate for the poor and impoverished is compelling and inspiring for us all.